This happened around 10 years ago, and it still gives me the creeps to this day. I was visiting my then best friend, let's call him Troy, and for some reason we really liked trying to contact the other side using a homemade Ouija board to see if spirits are real. We didn't do it just once, but several times. Stupid, I know, but when you're a teenager, you do many stupid things. We always strictly followed the rules of the game, though. But even if you follow the rules, it doesn't mean evil spirits won't be coming, and this story is an example of that. It was me, Troy, and two other friends with us. Let's call them Liz and Natalie. It was kinda late, and it was dark outside, and Troy said we should play some Ouija board. We all agreed to it, though Natalie and Liz were pretty scared because they never played it before. We set up the Ouija board we made, picked up a glass that isn't too heavy or big, and closed all doors and windows. After explaining the rules to Liz and Natalie, we started by seeing if we had someone with us, and the glass moved. We asked our questions. I don't really remember the questions we asked. It went pretty normal at first. The spirit answered normally, but after a while the glass started to move all over the place. It moved so fast and you couldn't make out words from the letters. I don't know if it started to speak another language or something. I know when the glass starts to move like that, it's a very bad sign and you should say goodbye immediately when this starts to happen. We all were pretty scared at this point. I saw the paper we drew the Ouija board on started to move, like there was a breeze of wind, but we were sure we closed every door and window. I felt a presence next to me and it felt so cold, and the paper kept moving. And before we had time to say goodbye, Liz's sweater had caught fire. It all happened so fast. We managed to put it out fairly quickly. The weird part is that after we put the fire out, there were no signs that her sweater had burned, no traces of a fire and no smell of burning. It made us all wonder if it just were some kind of illusion. I'm still very confused about it today. We said our goodbyes right after this because this spirit or demon went out of control, and who knows what could have happened if we would have kept going. I don't even want to know. After we said our goodbyes and closed up, we heard a loud noise sounding like some kind of fire alarm, and when we went to the living room to see where it came from, it stopped. We were all very confused and scared after this. I just wonder if it even happened or if it just was an illusion that we all saw. One thing I know, though, is that I will never play with a Ouija board again, and I suggest you stay away from it as well. You never know what can happen, especially if you don't follow the rules. My dad's been a builder all his life. Around 13 years ago, he would mainly be the manager of a group of men that would take down and rebuild old pubs and restaurants. But this one time, some seriously spooky things happened involving an old theater. It was 2006 and my dad had started work on a new pub. It was an old building and used to be a theater. Work was going fine, but my dad said that he always felt that there was something off about the building, which was fairly large. My dad, being the manager, would be the first one there in the morning, other than the security guard. He said that small paranormal things would happen, such as doors being held shut by no one and a few unexplained noises. But one morning, my dad and a few other men went to see the security guard. My dad said his face was white, and it seemed there was something wrong. My dad jokingly said, "You look like you've seen a ghost." But the security guard just slowly, with a broken voice, said, "I think I have." He then proceeded to explain how that night, while sat in his office, he thought someone walked past the door. He thought it was nothing, but when it happened again, he stood up and went to look. Nothing. He sat back down and a few minutes passed with no sound of footsteps or movement. He thought it was nothing, but then he heard it again. He quickly stood up and turned to the door, and across the room, standing in the doorway, was a man dressed in old, early 1900 clothing. "You can't be here," the security guard said. But the man took one look at him and slowly walked away from the door and down the corridor, out of sight from the security guard, who quickly ran to chase this man. But when he looked, he was met with a long empty corridor. My dad and all the other men were amazed at the story. And that night, as more of a joke than anything, they decided to get a Ouija board and see if this place was really haunted. Most of them didn't believe in ghosts and just thought it would be funny to do. That night, they all gathered around a table and tried out the Ouija board. Nothing happened at first, but soon a name was spelled out. John Bond. This may not have been the real name, but I can't recall what it was. My dad and his colleagues said they didn't move it or had heard the name John Bond before, but they all laughed it off and thought nothing of it. Weeks passed and the job was coming to a close. Some of the men were taking down the old wallpaper and putting a new one up. As they did, they came across a door that had been covered by the wallpaper. They called my dad over and joked about it being spooky. When they explored the hidden room, they found things from the old theater, like costumes, pictures of the performers, and an old piano. They told the owner of the building, and he told them to decorate the walls with the paintings and make a board in memory of the theater. They did as the man asked and put up the painting of the performers and musicians. The opening night of the new pub rolled around and all of the builders went there to celebrate the work they have done on the pub. The night was going fine, until my dad spotted an old man crying in the corner, sat on his own. So he and a few other men went over to see what was wrong. When asking, the man just pointed up to a picture of a man playing the piano that they had found in the room behind the wallpaper. The man, in a broken voice, said, "That man was my brother. He used to play piano here at the old theater. He died years ago, but this just reminded me of him." My dad looked at the painting, and a small golden plaque at the bottom of the painting caught his eye. He looked down and read the name, John Bond. This happened 3 years ago. At the time, I was about 20. My youngest sister and her best friend Ileana are 5 years younger than me. My sister and I have always been close and grew up playing with each other, so hanging out with her and Ileana wasn't all that weird. Ileana lives behind us, just separated by an alley. A little backstory on Ileana's house: it's haunted. Her father sees children and hears them laugh. My sister sometimes sees a little boy in the bathroom. Ileana's room is at the very end of the hallway. Across from her room is her grandpa's room when he comes down to visit. My sister gets scary vibes from his room. There are crosses and pictures of Jesus and saints on the walls of the room. My sister and I have seen gray blackish smoke on the kitchen ceiling that vanishes within seconds. The worst part is Ileana's mother waking up with scratches all on her back. I'm not sure if this is worth mentioning, but the mother's friend was allegedly possessed a week before the scratches. Ileana's mother and father separated shortly after that. They had some problems in their marriage other than the scratches. One day, Ileana was home alone. Her father wasn't coming back until the next day. My sister and I went over around 1 to hang out. There's this game that lets you communicate with ghosts using pencils. I'm not sure what it's called, but there are 2 people that are across from each other holding a pencil in each hand. The tips erasers touch. You ask questions while the erasers are touching. If it moves up and down, it's either a yes or a no. If the pencils cross, it's a maybe. My sister and I were the ones asking questions, and Ileana was on the bed watching us. I was a little skeptical since it wasn't a Ouija board and didn't know how pencils would let us talk to the paranormal. We found out we were communicating with this Mexican man that was a nice ghost. We asked if he knew who was scratching Ileana's mom, and he said he did, but it wasn't him. We asked if there are kids in the house and a boy in the bathroom. The Mexican man said yes. We had a nice chat with him and said our goodbyes. We're Catholic, and it was Ash Wednesday. Growing up with Catholic grandparents and a grandmother from Mexico, you know not to mess with the dead. But we went to church getting our ashes, thinking it would give us extra protection. I laugh at that thought now. We went to the latest service about 8 p.m. We got back to Ileana's around 9. We decided to play in the living room this time. My sister and I were asking questions, and Ileana was watching on the couch. This time the ghost we were talking to was a but boring, always answering with a maybe. We asked if we can say goodbye, but it was still saying no. We were all getting a little annoyed and worried. Out of nowhere, the remote control that was sitting on the drawer flew and off. We looked at each other and ran out the door. We were down the block and realized if we told my mom we were doing this, she would be mad. We also left Ileana's door open, and my phone and purse was still on the couch. We all went back together. We were at the door arguing about who was going inside to get my purse and phone. We were all chickens. As we were arguing, I seen a flash of blue lights above our heads. We all ran back to my house and asked each other what we seen. My sister and her friend seen the living and kitchen lights turn on and off, but I seen blue flashes of lights above us. We finally went to tell my mom. Weird thing is, when we went up to her with worried faces, she asked if we were doing something we weren't supposed to. We told her what happened, but left out the part of us trying to communicate with the paranormal. I wouldn't call my mom sensitive to the paranormal. However, she has experiences herself I'll share another time. But she said she felt or heard from the unknown that we were up to no good and playing games she would call evil. We confessed. I don't know how she knew. We never mentioned that game to her, knowing how she would react to it, and never played that game in our house. My mother came back with us to Ileana's house to grab my purse and cell phone. My mom asked my sister for the pencils so she can burn them. We found all of them but one. Not sure if you realized already, but we did not say goodbye to the ghost. I'm not too sure if saying goodbye had anything to do with the missing pencil, but we looked everywhere and couldn't find it. Just a little update. Ileana, her father and brother moved out and are now living in the next town. There are new people living in that house, and I wonder if they hear little kids laughing at night. When I was in my early teens, I had a fascination with divination, the occult, and spiritualism. Basically anything to offer some sort of proof that there is more to this reality than what we believe. This all started in the early 90s when I saw a Ouija board for sale in our local small-town grocery store. Needless to say, I bought it. I couldn't believe they actually sold these as games. Mind you, I lived in a small town and grew up disconnected from a lot of the pop culture staples of that era. I would play the board often, mostly with my stepbrother, Dan, and stepsister, Holly, when they came to visit during the summer months and over the holidays. Both of them were considerably younger than myself, me being no older than 13 at the time. The board became an obsession of mine, even though over 95% of the time nothing would happen, or when it did move, we would receive short, nondescript messages. On one cold winter day, this was about to change. My siblings and I retreated upstairs in an attempt to play the board. We lit the usual candles and killed the lights. After a few attempts to summon a spirit, the planchette started to move. This time, it felt different. It glided with ease around the board and answered simple yes and no questions with great finesse. In disbelief, we took our fingers off the planchette. The moment we did so, the flame on the candle began to shrink dramatically. We quickly placed our fingers back on the planchette, and the flame immediately came back to life. We then asked, "Where in the room are you?" The pointer spelled out, "Kite." We sat there confused for a moment until we realized that I had a kite mounted to the ceiling above our heads. At this moment, the kite began to flutter as if there was a slight breeze. We lived in a log cabin that did not have central air. There were no fans running, so this was quite odd. We continued playing and I decided to ask, "We'd like to know our spirit guides' names." A very new agey question as I look back. So I asked, "What is my guide's name?" The board spelled out Arthur. Dan asked for the name of his guide and the board lettered out Brett. And finally, Holly asked for hers, and the board replied Gareth. We were all kind of shocked with the results and discontinued playing to go downstairs and tell my mother the information we just received. After doing so, she replied, "I don't know. Look the names up in the dictionary." At the time, I thought this was pretty unhelpful advice, but reluctantly did. A dictionary probably isn't the best resource for looking up names, but this was before the internet, so I grabbed the dictionary off the shelf and began flipping through the pages. Searching the name, Brett came up with a few uninteresting results. Next, I looked up Arthur. Not surprisingly, King Arthur along with maybe a few other Arthurs were in the list. I then proceeded to look up Gareth. When I did so, my jaw hit the floor. Gareth was King Arthur's fucking nephew. I was completely dumbfounded. I knew at this moment that the names we received probably weren't the actual names of our spirit guides. These were purposefully crafted by something with the full awareness that we could or would look them up, draw a connection between the two. Now, before you go and assume my stepbrother and or sister pushed the planchette, keep this in mind. Dan has always had a learning disability. Even today, he still has difficulty spelling and uses voice to text because of it. I am 100% confident he couldn't have moved it. I am also 100% confident that neither of them at the time were well versed in the genealogy of Arthurian mythology. I have observed this with a skeptical point of view since the day it happened. This still remains as one of the few times the board actually moved, more or less provided us with legible, specific details. To this day, at the age of 39, I remain convinced that what we received was not from us, but from somewhere else. Something that I believe knew full well that my mother was going to tell me to look it up. This happened to me many years ago, which is about spiritualism via playing with a Ouija board. When I was about 15 years old, some childhood friends and I were quite fascinated with paranormal things like ghosts, private base phenomena such as UFOs, etc. We would sometimes venture out to such places to try and counter things. Mind you, we are talking about the mid to late 90s. when intelligent phones did not exist but digital gadgets were on the cusp of breakthrough. Anyways, one day a friend and I, during summer vacation, decided to get a Ouija board and go to another best friend's house and play with it. Everything went according to plan. In the morning we met up, obtained a Ouija board from a local supermarket, and went to our friend's house in the neighborhood we all grew up in. We gathered in his bedroom, turned the lights off, lit a couple candles, and asked it questions. It moved slightly but really never got any type of full-on encounter or experience. So we said whatever, and continued the day of hanging out and enjoying each other's company during summer vacation, typical teenage summer vacation fun. But this is where the crazy stuff began. Around a week or so later, I was at my house laying down on my bed in my bedroom around 8 p.m. I was just laying down relaxing, listening to music. Then all of a sudden I heard footsteps run up my bedroom wall outside of the house and then run across the roof quite quickly. Now my bed was against the wall, and I literally heard the footsteps run up the same wall outside of where my bed was against, and it sounded like a child running quickly. That was the length and span of each step, and it sounded like the entity was bipedal and running really fast. I then was quite surprised and didn't know what to do. I then went to the kitchen where my mom was washing the dishes, and I asked if my stepdad was on the roof doing some type of maintenance, and my mom was surprised at the question and said, "No, he's not up on the roof." I then returned to my room and thought about it for a while. Eventually, I forgot about it. Shortly after, I recall late at night when everyone was asleep, I would suddenly feel fear out of nowhere in my room and suddenly get paralyzed. It was crazy because when I felt the fear, it felt like a super fast rush of wind would race towards me and fill me, enter my being, and I would be paralyzed. My eyes rolled back all the way, and it was a level of fear and rage that I cannot describe in human words that would fill my whole being. Such incident would begin to happen about once a week and evolve to 2, 3 times a week for about 4 years throughout high school. Then it got to a point where one night I sensed the same fear enter my room while my whole family was asleep in their respective rooms, and again, such entity rushed and entered my body. My body arched, and then I felt myself levitate to the ceiling where my nose almost touched the ceiling. Then my body slowly returned back to the bed. I remember feeling everything and being able to see even though my eyes were rolled to the back of my eye sockets. I was able to feel the bed sheets over my body and hanging, and I was able to see how I was levitating nearer to the ceiling and everything. There was another incident where the same thing happened, and while I was paralyzed in such state, I remember using all my force and energy and moved my head toward the door of my bedroom, because while I was paralyzed, it was super hard to move any body part, let alone my mouth to scream for help or anything. And after looking at the bedroom door, in an attempt to run and escape such horrifying experience, I mustered up as much energy and motivation possible, and I tried leaping off my bed to run for the door. What I'm about to describe is unbelievable, but I am speaking from first-hand experience. And my inner self, soul or spirit, jumped out of my body and I hit the floor. I then started crawling to the door and was going to reach for the doorknob. But then I looked back to the bed and saw my body paralyzed with my eyes rolled back. I couldn't believe it. Then all of a sudden, my soul's spirit rushed back to my body and the entity left my body. The word terrifying does not begin to describe what one feels in such experiences. There were other nights where my mom, stepdad, and siblings would go grocery shopping at night, and I would stay at home watching TV. And while in the living room, I would hear about 15, 20 feet away from the living room, down the hall were the 3 bedrooms of the house, where I would hear one doorknob of one of the rooms turning and letting go, turning and letting go. Obviously, no one was in the house, and I would feel a presence back there, but did not dare to go investigate. I remember calling one of my best friends on the phone to distract my attention from that. Also, when those things were happening, every time I laid down on my bed sideways at night with my back facing the room and my face towards the wall, I would always hear people whispering in the room right behind me, and when I turned around to see, the whispers stopped. It would happen so much that I stopped laying down sideways to sleep, or if I laid down sideways, my face would be towards the room and my back against the wall. I can describe so many more experiences, but I would have to turn this into a book with chapters. LOL. Thankfully, years have passed. I am a full-grown man now, and those experiences and entity have dwindled away. I started going to church and it all faded away. To conclude, my word of advice is never dabble with a Ouija board.